co-host Katlego Tlapa, happy to be with you this morning for the concurrent sessions and then later on for the plenary with the Actuarial Society. And I hope you're enjoying the conference so far and that you're making the most of all the networking opportunities and presentations. Katlego, some of it yesterday, I have to be honest, went over my head, but it was fascinating, particularly the data science sessions, really scary and exciting at the same time.
No, I agreed. It was a fantastic day. I also, especially because I'm an actuary, I needed to pretend that I understand everything of those sessions, but there are some that also went a little bit over my head, so don't worry, you are not alone in that.
I'm a radio presenter, so I'm allowed to pretend that I don't understand. Look, today, before we get stuck into our first session and introduce our speaker, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge a number of people and organizations who've made this event possible. As you know, the 50th anniversary convention, it's a particularly special one. And we want to just thank the many sponsors and exhibitors who are with us today. Those include SA3, Milliman, the Liberty Group, Discovery, Sanlam, Hanover Re, Genry, Insight Actuaries, MBE Consulting, Old Mutual, RGA, Hollard, QED, Data Symphony, Dynamo Analytics, FIS Global, M&G Investments, Momentum Metropolitan, Munich Re, Network Finance, SCORE, Software Alliance, Swiss Re, Zivoni Actuaries and Consultants, Outsurance, and Algorithm Consultants and Actuaries. It takes a lot of people to make an event like this possible, and it is really greatly appreciated. Just a few items of housekeeping before we get stuck in. For those who were so busy yesterday attending panels, and I know some people were just running from one to the next, you might not have had a chance to explore everything that's available to see. So there is a hydration station down at the exhibition hall if you'd like to fill up your nice new water bottle. If you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of your nice new water bottle, you obviously haven't been to exchange the ticket that is in your pocket when you picked up your tag. Please go to the garderobe section because you can swap that for a water bottle and a funky pair of Assa socks. I believe there was a supply issue yesterday, but the socks are now here. Important announcement. So if you didn't get your pair yesterday, please swing by the garderobe and pick those up. Other thing to let you know about is the mosaic wall, which is being created downstairs. Basically, you're asked to go and have your photograph taken, and it gets loaded up onto that wall as a memento of this event. And obviously, it is an historic convention, being the 50th anniversary, so they'd really like everyone to be represented there. Discovery is hosting a working lounge where you can go and charge up if you need to and have a short face-to-face meeting, maybe just take some time to answer some quiet emails. You'll find that space downstairs. The Insight Chess competition has its stand there. We'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And then if you need some time for a private meeting space, maybe want to engage with one of the speakers in a quiet spot, there are several meeting pods to the side of the exhibition space, so please feel free to make those available to yourself. It's on a first-come, first-served basis. As I mentioned, the socks and water bottles at the garderobe on level 0. And also just a reminder to those who are going to the cocktails and dinner tonight, you do need to swing by there to pick up your wristband to give you access into the event. You can do that any time during the day at the garderobe. And if you are needing a parking ticket, you can also switch that out at the same facility. Now, Katlego, about that chess.
The chess. Thanks, Papa. This year, as you all know, that the Insight Orsa Actuarial Convention chess competition is ongoing. It was actually a call that was given to all of us, Pippa, to participate. I was keen to participate, but I realized that I have too much of a checkered past to be involved. So I let it go and will rather be a spectator. The final is upon us, so if you have been following the competition or not, this is your time to get involved and to watch the exciting bits of the competition, because the moment that we have all been waiting for is finally here. And the final will take place this morning during the refreshment break session. And this is where we will be witnessing the crowning of the first ever Orsa Convention chess competition sponsored by Insight. It's not just about the title, by the way. There is 10,000 rand up for grabs. Okay, maybe I should have just participated anyway. For the victor or victrix, whatever the case may be. And of course, the matching donation to the Moves for Life organization. So be sure to catch the final, which will be happening at 9 a.m. during the refreshment break and in the exhibition hall. As we go into this current session, maybe tell us a bit more about the Q&A approach, Pippa.
Thanks for that. So we are going to allocate roughly 40 to 45 minutes to the speaker, and then there's 10 or 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. For those of you who are here with us in person, all you need to do is just raise your hand to indicate that you've got a question. We have got a roving microphone which we'll bring to you. And please, just a reminder, it's really important to use that. I know sometimes, particularly when we're not too full, it might feel like you can just shout your question. But remember that there is a whole audience listening online who really need the audio feed to be able to follow you. So just raise a hand. For those who are joining us virtually, welcome to you as well. Great to have you with us for the second day. You've got the option of the Q&A function in the app, so please make use of that. And we will sort of juggle between the questions from the floor and those coming through on the app. We didn't manage to get through quite all of the questions in some cases yesterday, so just to say that if your question doesn't get answered during the session, please remember that you can use the WebEx app to reach out to the speakers and engage with them directly. That connections function on the WebEx app is there for exactly that reason. Please do use that. Right, Katlego, would you like to introduce our first speaker this morning?
Sure, thank you. The first topic that we're going to be discussing this morning is titled Embedding Orsa, Explore It and Discover Practical Improvement Ideas. And our presenter is NEELS MARITZ. And the idea here and the discussion is around the fact that, embedding the Orsa is a necessary requirement, but there is no industry framework to inform how to embed the Orsa. For those of you who have been engaged with the Prudential Authority, there is increased focus from questions, or there are questions that are being directed towards what is practically being done to embed the Orsa. So an understanding of what embedding the Orsa means, looks like, including what ChatGPT would give as its view around that idea and around embedding the Orsa, is going to be the subject matter of our discussion. And it's going to be an interesting one, and I am certainly looking forward to it. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome NEELS.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Embedding Orsa presentation. We gave up something good to be here. They say we are so good at sleeping, we do it with our eyes closed. When we focus our efforts on an Orsa report and a set of calculations, and we fail to appreciate all the processes underneath, we do not spend time and efforts on those processes, we put ourselves, our insurers, and our policyholders at risk. The iceberg in front of you represents the tip, is the Orsa report. Some people think of it as the Orsa calculation processes, but what's really important are what's underneath, the sub-processes. A few years ago, as you can see on the slide, 94% in 2012, 94% of insurers rated their Orsa capabilities as weak or needing improvement. 2 years later, 94% marginally improved to 77%. Just 4 years later, the Insurance Act was implemented. And today, 5 years later, we don't know the extent of embedding of Orsas in the industry. Our agenda today, we've got 10 items. Start out by talking about what is Orsa, why is Orsa important, what is embedding Orsa, and Orsa for new risks. Then we've got an opportunity for a polling question. Thereafter, we will get to the heart of the presentation, practical ideas to embed the Orsa. We'll touch on governance, and finally, we will touch on key points to take away from this presentation. Good. Orsa overview. Let's start out with this. In 2012, my job was capital and balance sheet management. And when Orsa, in 2012, when the readiness survey landed on my table, I was not quite sure what to make of the words Orsa. First thought, Gemorsa. Thereafter, Or South Africa. soar like an eagle. Orsas were on the road at all times at that stage. A few minutes later, when I read this is own risk and solvency assessment, it captivated me. The Orsa. So the Orsa is the forward-looking view of an insurer's own risk and solvency position. Typically over 5 years, but regulation says a minimum of 3 years, allowing for the insurer's business strategy and approved risk appetite. It's also necessary to stress the position of the insurer and to see the resilience of the solvency position. Very important, an Orsa is a regulatory requirement, and most important, it should be embedded. When you think of the word, think about the current solvency position and the forward-looking solvency position. Think about the regulatory view and the economic view. What are the differences in the risk profile of those two? Can those be explained, and are they well understood? Think about material risk assessments. What are the processes that are used to identify, assess, manage, and mitigate material risks? Short-term and long-term risks. The robustness of management actions are critical. Also, over the 5 years, the quantity and quality of own funds. Why is Orsa important? I've touched on the need to come up with management actions. It creates an awareness in the organization who is responsible for managing material risks. I've touched on needing an approved risk appetite and having clarity internally. Which risks do we have appetite for and which do we not have appetite for, and to what extent? What are the limits that are in place? Often I wonder, is it because of our training as actuaries that we see risks everywhere? Or do other people also see risks everywhere? Fortunately, risks also sometimes offer opportunities to us. Quite important, why do we do an Orsa? Well, it's different to a regulatory view. It's insurer specific. It allows for the unique characteristics of an insurer. And so important, there are risks in the industry and locally and globally which should be allowed for. Some top-of-mind risks for insurers: cybercrime. While we are sitting here, the cyber criminals are busy. Often the extent of their activities we don't know about. Climate change is a big risk in the industry. Locally, globally, very topical. The cost of living crisis with CPI, with inflation soaring in so many countries, as well as in South Africa, it's increasingly difficult for policyholders to meet premium payments. It is tough for companies to meet their growth targets and to hold on to policyholders. Often policy cancellations are above targeted levels. The Orsa allows for these risks in a mindful way. Understanding new risks. Organizations typically focus on what is familiar and what they specialize in. Operations are built for that, and when a new risk does come along, internally there may be no process or blueprint available to support with evaluating that risk, mitigating that risk. Having awareness regarding, is this risk actually material and relevant for the insurer, is important. Typically, risks have been in society for some time, and it's important to know at what stage it is relevant and material for the insurer. Orsa for new risks. Orsa, being a part of the ERM system, slots in as follows. For evaluating the risk during the process, do intensive research. Consult all possible sources that are available. Industry publications, risk barometers, what are the top 10 risks and how is the industry dealing with those locally and globally? Also having proxy models available is essential. Very often there are intricate, very accurate, detailed models that take 3-4 months to run, and it takes away from the use of the Orsa when there isn't enough proxy models available for risk owners in the organization to use and to understand the risks that they are responsible for. Proxy modeling is important. It's not going to be 100% the same as the detailed model, but it gives information and potential ranges for decision making. How to respond to the risk. During the Orsa process, a risk appetite is set. Do we actually have tolerance for this risk? Yes or no, and to what extent? And monitor that experience over time. The actual exposure to the risk compared to appetite. Often when data isn't available, and that is often the case with new risks, very few companies know what to do with climate change risk. What changes do they need to implement in their policy and claims processes now to be able to assess the risk 3 or 5 years from now? In the meantime, rely on, or not rely, but use information that is available in the industry to have an idea regarding the potential future exposure and current exposure. Regulation refers to Orsa as the totality of processes. And without visualization, it does become quite tricky to know where to focus. Having a look at the Orsa process diagram and structuring it as 12 sub-processes, starting with information collection, data, carrying on to number 5, risk identification, evaluation, and management. Thereafter, finance does the projections. Typically, the actuarial team does the risk and solvency calculations. Then the stressed scenarios are performed. Then the independent reviews. And finally, the Orsa reporting. Governance then happens, and it all concludes with an Orsa record. Thinking about the Orsa as these 12 sub-processes is helpful. Note that the Orsa report is just one sub-process. And the actuarial calculations, number 8, number 7, and 8, that's where the actuaries are typically involved, are a small part of the Orsa process. Good. What do we want to achieve? We want to embed the Orsa. What does that mean? How many of you are a little bit tired of all the catastrophes over the past couple of years? All the floods, also recently, the storms that are happening. It feels like a cat event happens annually. We've had social unrest in South Africa. There are so many catastrophic events that happen. When we are in that situation, having information available internally and having processes available help us to react in an informed manner and as fast as possible and as effective as possible. While researching embedding Orsa, the approach was start local, then look to the UK, because there are similarities so often between the countries, and then thereafter go global. The sources for South Africa was the SAM legislation. SAM legislation said the following about embedding Orsa. There needs to be a clear link between the Orsa outputs and the decision-making that happens in the organization. It's important that the time it takes to perform an Orsa is well known, it is measured, and the objective is to improve it over time. Because typically, Orsa becomes most relevant when it is a stressed situation, and that is when results are needed. Also, the need to be forward-looking, 3 to 5 years, to not just think about the now. The UK, the supervisory statement, interestingly said, a dashboard makes it useful to the board of directors, a visualization of decisions previously made, what is experienced to date. And at the current point in time, they can revisit decisions previously made. Also see how good or bad that decision has been to date and tweak what needs to be tweaked. Interestingly, the statement specifically referred to the wording Orsa dashboard. The insurance core principle, which from the IAIS, for me the most important one, and I believe you would agree, is having sufficient capital is not enough to protect policyholder interests. There needs to be effective and disciplined risk management practices. Also, the bottom bullet, the importance of risk culture, of employees in the organization being risk aware, and each person doing their bit to manage risks and protect policyholder interests, the insurer, and ultimately their employer. Also importantly, looking at the insurance core principles, it focused quite a bit on making sure that all material risks are covered in risk management, in ongoing operations, and that there are limits in place for those risks. After doing the academic research, it was time to zoom in on the English being used. The regulatory requirement says Orsa should be embedded in the strategic decision-making processes of the insurer. Let's simplify that. Embedded means, the definition of it, it is under the surface or being used at present. Strategic means helping to achieve a plan. Decision-making is the process of making choices, especially deemed important or of great value. One way to rephrase the requirement is as follows. Orsa is the base and should be used in the insurer's process of making important choices. Capital planning and capital management choices should help the insurer achieve its business strategy. In practice, what does that mean? Well, if the insurer wants to reduce the potential volatility from equity risk, consider potential risk management and mitigation tools available to help the insurer achieve that. Hedge the risk. What are the potential instruments available? What clarity regarding, if we do that, what are the new risks being introduced? Ultimately, looking at all material risks and considering all potential practical ways to manage that, to keep it within risk appetite and limits, is important. A few months following the conclusion of the paper, everywhere there was talk about ChatGPT being able to solve anything. Obviously, me being me, I thought, should I have written this paper? Could ChatGPT have written this paper? So, consulted ChatGPT and asked it, what is embedding Orsa? It did apologize for not specifically knowing what embedding Orsa is. It had general information about an Orsa, new risks for insurers, as well as, let me think, what did I want to say now? Typical steps on how to embed, especially that bit. I thought it was like, okay, typical steps to embed an Orsa. I was surprised it had some of that, but only a few, and it was quite interesting. It did apologize for not knowing about GOI 3.1, Orsa for insurers. It also mentioned embedded within the context of machine learning, which is quite interesting, the concept of embedding. So overall, mixed results. Fascinatingly, the ChatGPT mentioned there are 26 ICPs, which was quite surprising because the answer has always been 25, and it mentioned visit the IAIS website. Did visit the IAIS website, there was still just 25 there. Googled a little bit, didn't get the answer to what is ICP 26. Asked ChatGPT, what is ICP 26? It gave me conflicting answers within 10 seconds. So mixed results. Consult a paper for more on that. It's an appendix in the paper, and there's a lot of other great stuff in the paper and interesting things to read. This was the conclusion. Change is messy. Good. Time for a polling question. If you pick up your cell phones, have a look at agenda. Just waiting for the polling question to pop up. Do you think more can be done in your organization to embed the Orsa? If you log in, agenda, polling, and the potential answers, yes, no, or maybe. Good, we're at 68% yes, 33% maybe, 64 votes. The law of large numbers, we are waiting for 100 votes. 67% yes at 88 votes. There's 1% that thinks no. Okay, we are at 100 votes. More than 2/3 of us think more can be done to embed the Orsa. Let's wrap up the poll. Thank you. We are now at the heart of the presentation, practical ideas to embed Orsa. Let's recall the Orsa process diagram with the various sub-processes. We will start with number 1, go up until number 10, and cover 3 ideas per Orsa sub-process in terms of how to better embed Orsa. Remember, it starts with each sub-process. What should be done differently in a sub-process? What new should be done? What should no longer be done? Those are the things to think about for it all to ultimately integrate well. Sub-process number 1, information collection. During the process of information collection, the process should check that the information being received is considered credible and final. The information should be approved by the board of directors and the actuarial committee and the audit committee. Very important that the templates being used, management should buy into those templates. They should understand the importance of why do we need this information. And so critical that, very importantly, they should buy into the template, but it should be populated by information from the back end. Information that's considered objective and factual, not subjective risk assessments by one individual, because there's so much that one individual does not see. We've touched on research and the importance of it. Performing research during the Orsa process is essential to ensure that we are not just internally focused, but also externally focused. The second sub-process, data. How often do we talk about data issues? It often becomes a reason or an excuse for doing something or not doing something. It is so important to quantify data corrections. What is the risk and solvency position before and after data corrections? Do not comment on it simply qualitatively. Make it a quantitative exercise so that there is clarity regarding the potential data issues and what should be fixed at a minimum. When data adjustments are made, in order for data to become usable, quantify it, but also justify it. Why is it the case that we are missing so many sum insureds in our claims data? Why is it the case that we do not have the minimum required policyholder information in our policyholder system? Are we chasing sales too fast at the expense of collecting the necessary minimum information? Automating processes is a great way to make the Orsa process faster. As mentioned in the paper, I'm not a proponent of automating everything. It's too risky. More like automate processes that are repeatable and do not require human intervention for completion or any human judgment. Those are nice areas to make the data preparation faster and get to results faster when it's still relevant, because then the Orsa will be used more. Sub-process number 3, business strategy. A business strategy should be set on assumptions that are not too good to be true. Often, when a business strategy is aggressive and very optimistic, it's great, it looks great on paper, but is it supported by recent experience? Is it supported by actual formal agreements? It's so important to make sure that there's credibility in the business strategy. Typically, having a realistic outlook is important. Delta movements in the business strategy should be allowed for. Doing an Orsa once a year is infrequent. When actual experience deviates quite a bit from expectations, be active and consider doing an out-of-cycle Orsa, so that there's clarity 7 months later regarding our position now. Risk function inputs is essential. When a business strategy is optimistic, the question needs to be asked, has the risk function provided appropriate input and assessment of the financial and operational risks in the business strategy? Is this within risk appetite for all the material risks? Number 4, risk appetite. When risk appetite is set at an executive level and not at a more granular level, it may become difficult to use it in practice. When there are limits at an individual risk level, as well as tools available for each material risk owner to know the potential movement in the risk and potential options that will increase or decrease the risk level, the Orsa can be used more. Consult business stakeholders. Often, data does not tell the full story. Data tells the known story, and it tells it again, and it confirms it to the reader. Consult widely, consult business stakeholders and subject matter specialists. What do you think? Ask them, what do you think is not captured in this data? What are the risks we should allow for? Using the data that is available internally is also important. Often there are data marts on the claim side and the underwriting side with a lot of data that can be transformed into insights and valuable information. So before saying that we do not have data for this, make sure that the internal data that we do have was analyzed and well understood. Operationalizing the risk sensitivities talks about when someone, the material risk owner, wants to know the potential movement of this risk, the assessment of it, they should have information available and tools available that can inform that. Sub-process number 5, risk identification, evaluation, and management. Orsa is key to the ERM system. When we sit around a table with our teams, we often have the nicest discussions regarding, have you seen this, and what if this happens, and this has happened in that area. A lot of internal knowledge gets lost when it isn't captured in internal processes. However, when there is a platform available for all employees to capture their observations regarding what they are seeing, and that gets submitted in a process which someone can consider, it's valuable information in terms of what is actually happening operationally and what should we change in our processes. Often, it could result in perhaps we should change something small and capture 1 or 2 data fields there that 1 or 2 years from now we can use to actually assess the particular risk that we are thinking of. Risk quantifications. Risk quantifications at 1 in 200 levels feels very abstract and often inconceivable. Risk capital levels are calculated at 1 in 200, but there's so much more buy-in from management when risk quantifications are done at more conceivable levels. At 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 levels, when someone has worked for 20 years, there is 20 years of experience that they can anchor and understand. In the past, we've had the following stress scenarios, and this is how we reacted at the time, as well as a reflection. Orsa could have helped over there. So going forward, potentially that is an area where Orsa can play a role. Model risk management. Insurers have many functions: actuarial, reinsurance, finance, IT, data, risk, to name a few. Each function with tools and models, and always more than anticipated, and often in silos. Yet, there's one set of Orsa outputs. So it shouldn't be a mystery how it all integrates to give Orsa outputs. There should be clarity regarding what are the material models in our business, the ones with model risk, potentially severe data concerns, or a lot of judgment being made in some decisions that we actually don't have confidence in. There should be clarity regarding how that integrates, as well as an outlook. What should we anticipate may happen to our results and why? Let me just have a quick sip of water. Interestingly, I don't know what came to mind with this particular comic. It looks like From a Beautiful Mind, the movie with John Nash, where just John Nash can understand what is written there. The powerful thing about Orsa is it takes data from the past, the present, and the future, 3 to 5 years, and it transforms it now into valuable insights. That is why the Orsa is powerful and useful. Orsa sub-process number 6, the input projections. This typically comes from the finance team. It's the business strategy over the next 3 to 5 years. Those should be holistically reasonable. Movements over the next 3 years in the income statement and the balance sheet should be consistent with each other. When the insurer anticipates the following growth, that should be reflected in the income statement as well, in the premium lines, the investment income, the expenses. The projections should speak to each other over all the 5 years, not just the first year or the second year. Yes, it is difficult to predict thereafter, but they should still be consistent with each other. Granular data is important. If you recall from the Orsa process diagram, and we'll see it a bit later again, there are sideways arrows. Often, one part of the sub-process is completed. We've got more granular data available now. So let's go back and potentially recalculate a certain part of the Orsa process for more accurate risk and capital calculations. Reviewing assumptions is important. Material assumptions are sometimes made, and transparency regarding that can be more. For example, what is the split between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 own funds, and why? What is the dividend payout ratio over the next 5 years? Is it justifiable and sensible? Sub-process number 7. The actuaries get involved quite a bit during this sub-process, calculating the capital and the solvency and projecting it. We've already touched on the importance of proxy models. When there is a detailed model, that's typically within the actuarial team, spend time on developing proxy models, information for key management and risk owners in the organization. An economic risk profile. This is a key reason why Orsa is needed. Solvency capital requirement, the regulatory view, covers on underwriting and market risk and operational risk. Typically, it's used as an anchor for Orsa. However, there are so many more risks that should be allowed for and that are specific to an insurer. Climate change, cybercrime, the culture of the insurer. Is the insurer a talker or a doer? That's important. What is the culture? Do we implement? Or are we slow to implement? Because it all boils down to execution. Optimizing capital, knowing the material risks, and the potential risk-adjusted metrics is essential. Consider key operational areas and what decisions can be made to improve the use of capital across reinsurance, asset liability management, product renewals. Sub-process number 8, stressed scenarios. Ensure during the stressed scenario process that all financial risks are covered. Potentially in the past, liquidity risk was not a concern, but do not use the past as the reflection of the future. Potentially liquidity risk may be highly relevant and should be considered in the upcoming stress scenarios. For operational risk scenarios, do not fall into the trap of thinking it is simple because it looks simplistic in the SCR calculation. For operational risk is complex. System downtime for a few hours means premiums cannot be collected, claims cannot be paid out, but it doesn't stop there. For reputational risk can be severe and very damaging. Management actions. Spend enough time on management actions. Are management actions specific, measurable? Are the financial impacts realizable within the desired amount of time? Is there clarity regarding roles and responsibilities? Because remember, during the stress scenario, people will want it all on paper, agreed in the past. This is what we will do, because during a stress scenario, the thinking will not be that clear. Sub-process number 9, reviews. Independent reviews in particular. During the Orsa process, there are various phases of doer-reviewer, especially during the calculations. This in particular, sub-process focuses on someone that is more operationally independent from the Orsa. It's important to review the models being used, especially the proxy models. They need to be relevant and they need to be accurate enough for decisions to be made on them, the potential ranges provided. Risk appetite is a key area to review. Is management using the Orsa in the organization? And is there clarity regarding material risks and limits? What decisions have been taken over the past year? And how does that map compare to material risks? Is the Orsa being used in the organization to protect policyholders? Sub-process number 10, Orsa reporting and executive summary. An Orsa report once a year is a static document, so having a live dashboard with visualizations, with up-to-date information that is relevant to management helps Orsa to be used more. As mentioned, management should inform the design of the dashboard. Orsa users should be specific. An Orsa report, often 100 or 200 pages, having an executive summary, let's say 10 pages, with specifics regarding our material risks and where Orsa was used, is important, as well as what management will do during stressed scenarios. Audience language is critical. There is actuarial and risk technical terminologies in an Orsa report. An executive summary should be simple and written from the perspectives of the audience. It should focus on the framework of the audience, typically business decisions. Another skill set to risk. So think about that carefully. To write many pages which someone does not engage with is not a helpful strategy. Governance focuses on the strategic matters. There's no need to overcomplicate processes. It can be specific and risk-based and often simple. When it becomes too complicated, that in itself is a new risk. As actuaries, we find ourselves often in board of directors as an actuarial control function or a risk management control function. These areas provide opportunities to motivate for increased use and embedding of the Orsa. The board of directors is ultimately responsible for ensuring effective systems of risk governance. It relies on input and assurance from the control functions. The actuarial control function looks after input models and output models, also comments on management actions. The risk management control function helps ensure that the risk culture is healthy and that enterprise risk management is effective. Risk identification, risk evaluation, risk management, monitoring, reporting and mitigation. To touch on just two of the policies, the Orsa policy, it should cover embedding the Orsa. It should also cover areas of the Orsa that are subject to independent review. Now, if you recall the Orsa process, there is so much that can be independently reviewed. So having a review plan is important. Over a certain period of time, we touch on all the important areas. Also, an Orsa policy touches on data quality requirements, as well as how stress testing is performed. Having a look at the capital management policy, it should cover the internal capital planning process. Areas of the capital management process that are subject to independent review is also covered there. And importantly, what are the internal targets that we want to meet? And should there be a shortfall, what are the means available to fill that gap? Polling question number 2. Everyone, let's get our cell phones and go. Yes.
5 minutes remaining.
Okay, 5. Yeah, 100%. Thank you. Good. Do you know where to use the Orsa in your organization to add value? Good. Okay, give me a sec. Very curious to see the results. The cell phone decided this is automation risk. Okay, brilliant. We see over here 45% of people know where to use the Orsa in their organization to add value, so that's great. And apologies for turning my back. 33% maybe, so a little bit more time needed to reflect and think about what can potentially be done. And then 1/5 of us are thinking no at the moment, but there's still enough time to reflect and come up with ideas. Interesting. Let's wrap up the poll in the interest of time. Key conclusions. An Orsa is a forward-looking view of an insurer's own risk and solvency position. Embedding the Orsa is a regulatory requirement. There's no holistic implementation framework available that sets out the steps. This is how to embed the Orsa. There is some guidance, and check out, for example, the Actuarial Society Orsa subcommittee for guidance in that regard. Perform research, perform analysis. Design the Orsa to be ready for use by management. A value-adding Orsa is an Orsa that underpins important decisions. Let's recall the Orsa process and the sub-processes across the various functions. Actuarial, finance, risk, reinsurance, MI. Focus on incremental improvements in the sub-processes. Why incremental improvements? Well, Orsa touches so many functions and so many people in an organization. It will be difficult to do a complete overhaul. Let's work with what we have. Let's make it better. I leave you with this. In which sub-process will you take action? Think about your job, where you reside. Sometimes you may be responsible for a particular sub-process, or you may provide input to someone that is responsible for a sub-process. Think about the information being shared. If the information is not already in your mind relevant and valuable, why are you sharing it? That moment is an opportunity to redefine the information being shared and to negotiate what can be done differently. Remember the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is the Orsa report. For some people, because we are actuaries, it may mean the Orsa calculations. But what's underneath the various Orsa sub-processes is where embedding the Orsa lies. To avoid a crash and sink situation, think about and recall the complete Orsa process. I thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you so much, Niels. We've got limited time for audience questions, so if you do have one that you'd like to ask, please raise a hand quite smartly and we'll get a microphone to you. In the absence of hands on the floor, in the meantime, though, we have one from James on the WhatsApp line. James's comment is, I think we all know and agree that Orsa is a good thing, but how do we better see and communicate that it is a valuable thing? Do we have any good examples over the last few years of how such a process has had significant positive impact on a business? In other words, what is the tangible business case to significantly invest in truly embedding Orsa?
Yes, thanks, James. Awesome question. To summarize it, when thinking about the material risks, let's say interest rate risk for an organization, the Orsa can help with awareness. What is the level of interest rate risk? What are the potential ways to manage this? The potential instruments available. What should we do differently in our products? What should we change and where should we change it? Having that sort of an approach for each of the material risks, consciously investing in each risk, is where the Orsa is helpful. In the absence of that, the anchor is typically what is known already and known to date, and very often specified in the FSI, the regulatory view, which is great, but it is an industry average. It's not insurer specific. So practical examples for each material risk, there are practical examples. Depends on is there a particular risk you would like to talk about. Any other questions?
Should we wrap with one last one from the app? Gustav commenting that in most companies, the Orsa stress scenarios are intensive calculations spread across multiple departments. This is also just one part of an employee's responsibilities. How do you suggest changing this to an ongoing process to have more up-to-date information for the board?
Great question, Gustav. In summary, the annual Orsa process with stressed modeling will still happen and often take quite a few weeks or months to complete the calibration, the modeling, the review. Having proxy models available is important for the material risks, and having that information available can help key decision makers. It should not be just once a year that stress scenario results are seen. It can be quarterly, as well as an awareness regarding, we know this is a material risk, this can potentially happen, and this is how we can potentially respond to it. The management actions, having those specific management actions, the options. If this happens, this is how we can manage it. List of options is quite important throughout the year, not just once a year.
Thank you so much, NEELS.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, everyone, if you would like to engage further with NEELS, and to those whose virtual questions we didn't get to, please remember you can connect with him via the WebEx app to engage further. We are going to have a short break for coffee. You're invited to pause for a little reflection if you'd like to join the next Liberty Mindfulness session, as per the screen behind me. Otherwise, do go and check out that big chess final underway right now at the ASSA stand. And again, remember, please, to go and get your selfie taken for the mosaic wall. It's opposite the ASSA stand in the exhibition hall. We'll regroup for the plenary at 9:30. See you, everybody, there. And please remember, if you are attending the event tonight, to go and pick up your wristband at the guardrobe. See you at 9:30.